After 6 years by Prince Louis's side, his trusted bodyguard was suddenly fired, and what he did next had everyone talking. Most people don't notice the bodyguards. That's the point. They're trained to blend in, stay quiet, and act only when they must. But over time, there are some faces that become familiar. The quiet man is always 3 steps behind. The firm hand at the child's shoulder, the one who isn't family, but never far. For Prince Louis, that man was Callum Rhys Bennett. When he first took the job, Callum was 34, a former Royal Marines commando with 11 years of service and commendations that most men would keep framed on a wall, except he never hung them. He didn't care for trophies. What mattered to him was order, structure, and purpose. And when he joined the Royal Protection Unit, he found all 3. He wasn't placed with Louis immediately. First, he handled various members of the royal household on rotation, distant cousins, visiting dignitaries, once briefly Princess Anne. But when Prince Louis turned 2, Kensington Palace requested a full-time close protection officer to be assigned to him, someone consistent, discreet, and, above all, dependable. Callum fits the bill. At first the little prince didn't take to him. Louis was spirited, stubborn, and prone to outbursts of laughter or frustration at a moment's notice. He hated holding hands, hated hats, and didn't care much for orders. But Callum didn't force his presence. He kept a respectful distance, stayed nearby during nursery drop-offs, and gradually allowed Louis to warm to him at his own pace. It took 3 weeks. One afternoon, after a long day shadowing the family at a children's charity event, Callum stood by the car as the prince was buckled into his seat. Without warning, Louis leaned toward him, looked up, and said, "You're not as boring as the others." Kate had laughed. High praise, Callum. From that day forward, it changed. Louis would seek him out in crowded spaces, call him Cal, and mimic his walk during family strolls. For the first time in a long while, Callum didn't feel like just another moving part in a big machine. He felt trusted. In the following years, he became a fixture. Easter services, first days at school, balcony appearances. He was always in the frame, just barely. He learned to anticipate Louis's moods better than most. He knew when to distract him before a tantrum could bubble up, how to draw a smile with an inside joke, and how to calm the prince's nerves before facing a wall of flashing cameras. But as Louis grew, so did the rules around him. In year 5 of Callum's assignment, a new internal policy started rotating security personnel more aggressively. The idea, according to officials, was to prevent emotional entanglement and ensure that protection remained purely professional. Callum didn't like it. He believed in emotional discipline, yes, but he also believed that being reliable and earning trust was key to keeping a child safe. And Louis was still a child, no matter how often the world placed him under scrutiny. Tensions began to mount between Callum and some of the higher-ups at the Royalty and Specialist Protection Branch. He wasn't defiant, but he didn't hide his concerns either. A few offhand remarks during security briefings about risk management and the importance of consistency were noted and eventually reported. Still, he kept his post. The Cambridges, especially Kate, appreciated his presence. He was professional, calm, and entirely unambitious. He didn't seek closeness. He didn't overstep. But quietly, he'd become part of the fabric. And then came the event that changed everything. It was a warm spring morning in early May. The royal family was attending a community event at a countryside school. William was speaking inside with local leaders. Kate was seated with a group of children for an arts and crafts segment. Louis, meanwhile, was set to plant a tree in the garden. It was a photo op designed to be light and charming. Callum, as always, scanned the crowd. The outer perimeter was secured. The local constabulary was cooperative. Still, something didn't sit right. A man in his mid-30s stood just beyond the tape, holding what appeared to be a clipboard. He wore the vest of a volunteer, but Callum didn't recognize his face from the staff list they'd been given that morning. His grip on the clipboard was tight. His eyes were darting, not watching Louis, but watching the security. Instinct took over. Callum moved, quietly, efficiently. He approached from the left flank, signaled with a subtle hand gesture to the constable nearby. Within seconds, he closed in. "Name?" he asked the man. The man stuttered. His badge didn't match the credentials they were issued. The clipboard had nothing but blank pages. It wasn't a direct threat, not technically. No weapon, no aggressive move, but it was enough to breach protocol, enough to call attention. Later that day, during the debrief, the incident was reviewed. Callum's quick thinking had neutralized a potential threat, but he'd also ignored a stand-down order issued over comms by one of the royal security supervisors, who hadn't perceived the man as dangerous. That was the problem. Callum didn't contest the reprimand, but when asked to write a formal apology for overstepping his assignment, he refused. He'd do it the same way again, he said. His duty wasn't to the optics, it was to the child. 3 weeks later, he was dismissed. The official phrasing was clinical, a reassignment due to internal restructuring. There was no public announcement, no statement from the palace. One day he was there, the next, gone. Louis asked about him. Kate paused, then gently said, "He's working somewhere else now." But Callum wasn't working. Not yet. He left London without fanfare, moved to a quiet town in Dorset where he had no family, no attachments. For the first time in decades, he didn't know what came next. His phone barely rang. No jobs lined up. His silence was by choice, not pride. But something inside him couldn't settle, because after all those years of guarding a prince, he realized something. The world had other children, children no one guarded. And what Callum did next wasn't about going viral. It wasn't about proving anything to the palace or the public. It was something far more personal. What began as a quiet decision would soon draw attention from places Callum never imagined. For a man trained to react under pressure, the stillness of normal life felt foreign. Callum Bennett spent the first 2 weeks in Dorset waking before dawn, just like always. He made his bed with tight hospital corners, ran 5 miles through the sleepy lanes, then returned to make black tea and sit by a window that faced nothing but fields. It should have been peaceful. Instead, it felt like being stuck between chapters with no idea what page came next. He didn't touch the television, didn't scroll online. A few neighbors had noticed the new man in the stone cottage on the edge of the village, but he kept to himself. All they saw was a man with a soldier's walk and quiet eyes. Then one day he went for a walk in town. Not for any particular reason, he just wanted to move, maybe find a newspaper, maybe feel something other than invisible. That's when he heard the shouting. It came from the community center across the green. The old brick building doubled as a food bank and youth drop-in center on weekdays. Outside, a woman in a navy coat was struggling to manage 3 boys, all under 10, one of whom had clearly just thrown a shoe. Callum hesitated. It wasn't his business. But then the boy shoved the woman hard and bolted toward the road. Callum moved without thinking. He covered the ground in seconds, caught the boy by the collar just before he hit the curb, and swung him gently back towards safety. The boy squirmed and kicked, shouting about how he didn't care, how he hated everything. Callum didn't flinch. He crouched to eye level and said calmly, "You okay?" The boy froze, then nodded. The anger dissolved fast, just like Louis used to. Just like kids always do when they sense the adult isn't scared of them, but isn't angry either. The woman came running up, breathless, and thanked him profusely. "I'm Emma," she said. "He's Jamie. Sorry, he's going through things." Callum only nodded. "I've dealt with worse." She laughed awkwardly. "You work with kids?" He paused. "Not anymore." It could have ended there, just a small town incident, forgotten by the next morning. But something about that moment sat with him. The boy wasn't bad, he was lost, angry, unheard. That night, Callum couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how many kids out there were like Jamie. No structure, no stability, no one is consistent. It echoed what he always said during those palace briefings. The child needs predictability. The next morning, he walked back to the center and asked to speak with whoever was in charge. Her name was Lorraine. She ran the drop-in space 3 afternoons a week with just 2 volunteers. Understaffed, underfunded, and overworked. When Callum offered to help, he looked suspicious at first until he handed over his full ID, clean background check, and former royal credentials. Her jaw nearly hit the floor. "You guarded Prince Louis?" "I looked after him, yeah, for 6 years." She blinked. "And now you're here?" He shrugged. "Kids are kids." He started small. helping during afternoon hours, playing football in the back lot, sitting in when the younger ones refused to do their homework. He wasn't soft, but he was steady. And that, it turned out, was exactly what the kids needed. Word spread in the town fast, not online, but in whispers between parents and teachers. The man who used to guard royalty was now helping their kids stay out of trouble, and he wasn't asking for attention or money. He was just there. Within a month, attendance at the center tripled, not because of publicity, because kids who never came before started showing up. Troubled boys, shy girls, teens are caught between doing what's right and making the wrong choices. Some didn't know who Callum had worked for. They just knew he listened, and when he gave them a rule, he stuck to it. Lorraine pulled him aside one afternoon and asked, "Why are you really doing this?" Callum leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "Because I was replaced before I was finished. Because there are kids who get thrown out before someone teaches them how to stand up straight." She nodded. That was enough for her. Then came the day that changed everything. It was late June. Jamie, the same boy Callum saved weeks earlier, had gotten into a fight at school. He punched a teacher. The police were called. Instead of suspension, they planned to press charges for assault. The boy was 10. When Callum heard, he left the center and drove straight to the school. Calmly, firmly, he asked to speak to the head teacher. He made no excuses for Jamie's behavior. But he asked the question that turned the meeting on its head. Do you want him to learn something, or just disappear into the system? The head teacher stared at him. And in that moment, something strange happened. Callum Bennett, the invisible bodyguard who spent years in silence, became someone people listened to. He offered to step in as Jamie's mentor for 3 months. Daily check-ins, one-on-one support, reports back to the school, no pay, no titles. Just a chance to prevent another child from being pushed into a cycle that started too early and ended too hard. The school agreed. A week later, someone posted about it. A teacher, quietly impressed, shared the story on a private educators forum. No photos, just the facts. The former Royal Protection officer who now protected kids in a village no one had heard of. From there, it was out of Callum's hands. Journalists called, but he didn't answer. Producers reached out, but he refused. Even an official from a major charity tried to get in touch, saying, "We'd love to help you launch a national program." He said no to all of it. He didn't want a movement. He just wanted to be useful. But change has a way of growing beyond our control. One evening, after football practice with the kids, Callum walked into the center and found Lorraine staring at her laptop. "You might want to see this," she said, turning the screen. It was a grainy photo taken from across the street, showing him holding Jamie's hand as they crossed the road. The headline above it read, "From Prince to Problem Youth, Former Royal Bodyguard's New Mission." Callum didn't blink. "It's not about me." But Lorraine just smiled. "It is. Now." By the time the palace found out what Callum had done, things had already gone too far to ignore. And quietly, behind closed doors, people who once sent him away began asking the one question they never thought they'd ask. Should we have let him go at all? Keep watching to see how this unfolds. When Callum Bennett first joined the Royal Protection Unit, he never imagined his work would matter beyond the walls of Kensington Palace. His job was to blend in, observe, and protect. But now, for the first time, people were seeing him for who he was. Someone who understood how to make children feel safe, even when their world was spinning out of control. The article hadn't come from a tabloid. It was a small blog run by a former teacher, and the story had no flashy headline, no clickbait, just honesty. But within days, it had been picked up by larger outlets. Not for gossip, but for inspiration. The story of a man who used to guard a prince now mentoring a child the world had nearly given up on. It hit something deeper. Callum didn't like it. Not because he was shy, but because the attention threatened to turn something personal into something performative. Still, he knew better than to fight it. He simply carried on. Same schedule, same work, same quiet commitment. Then the first letter arrived. It came in a plain white envelope, no return address, just a royal crest pressed into the wax seal. Inside was a single card, no signature, just 8 handwritten words. Some duties don't end. You never stopped serving. There was no name, but Callum knew exactly who it was from. It wasn't Prince William, and it certainly wasn't anyone from security. The handwriting belonged to someone much smaller, someone who used to draw spaceships on napkins during lunch breaks, and once asked Callum if guards ever got lonely. Louis. The boy he'd watched grow from toddler to sharp, wide-eyed schoolboy. The boy who once whispered to him during a parade, "You're the only one who listens. You know that?" Callum closed the card gently and placed it in a drawer. He didn't need a follow-up. That message said everything. But back at the palace, not everyone was so quiet. You see, once the media caught on, questions started coming in. Why had a guard with such a strong record been let go? Was it really about a routine restructuring or something more? Officials gave the usual responses. Personnel matters are private. We don't comment on internal security decisions. Still, whispers slipped out that perhaps someone, somewhere had made a hasty call, that maybe Callum had stepped in one too many times, spoken up about things others chose to ignore. Some claimed he had become too attached. Others said he crossed lines, acting like more than just a bodyguard. But those close to the situation remembered differently. They remembered how Prince Louis always looked back to find Callum in a crowd, how the boy would sometimes refuse to move until Callum gave a nod. That wasn't protocol, that was trust. And when trust is broken in a palace, it rarely gets repaired. Meanwhile, Callum's work continued to grow, whether he liked it or not. Schools from nearby towns asked if he could speak with troubled students. He refused formal speeches but agreed to meet one-on-one. Local councils offered to fund new programs. He only accepted what would directly help the kids. No branding, no logos, just real support. People began calling the approach the Bennett method. Structure, presence, calm. But he still didn't call it anything. To him, it was just what you do when you care. But something even stranger happened weeks later. One of the royal family's private advisors reached out. The message was simple. "There's interest in what you've built." Quiet interest. Callum raised an eyebrow. He didn't reply. Then came the second letter. This time it's official. Stamped. Signed. It came from an undersecretary at the Home Office, asking if he'd consider joining a new national task force on youth safety. He wasn't the only candidate, but his name had come up strongly. He declined. Not because he wasn't interested in helping, but because he knew what happened when you built something meaningful and then handed it off to bureaucracy. He wasn't done. Not yet. Instead, he expanded his own work, slowly, quietly. He helped establish satellite groups in 3 neighboring towns, each run by volunteers he trained personally. No media, no press releases, just results. And all the while, Prince Louis was watching. Callum didn't know that until another letter came, months later. This time, a drawing. Crude, childish, but unmistakable. A stick figure with a black suit and sunglasses, standing next to a smaller figure with a paper crown. Beneath it, written in blocky pencil letters, "Still my favorite guard." Louis Callum smiled for the first time in weeks. He didn't frame it, didn't post it, just kept it folded in his wallet to remind himself that even if the world didn't understand what happened, the young prince did, and maybe that was enough. As for the palace, no statement was ever made, no reversal, no rehiring, but those inside knew what wasn't said sometimes mattered more than what was, because behind those gilded gates, people began to rethink what loyalty really looked like, and why some of the best protectors are the ones who never stop, even when told to step away. What do you think? Did the royal family quietly regret letting him go? Could they have misjudged a man who clearly meant more to Prince Louis than they realized? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the following video shown on your screen. You will enjoy it.